really hot in the chairs at this point. We've just finished up the Lincoln episode, which you will have already heard by the time this one's out. And now we're pushing into another favorite topic of tour guide talk.
Famous Texan John Bell Hood.
Right back to Texas.
Right back to Texas.
That was almost unflinching.
Yeah.
But he's not actually from Texas.
I know.
He's a Kentuckian.
And then he lived in Louisiana.
Yeah, died
in Louisiana.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So we're talking John Bell Hood and John Schofield. Old JBH.
Ah, yes.
Old Johnny B. Johnny B. Hood.
John versus John.
John and John.
The Battle of Johns.
Doesn't quite have the same ring as the Battle of Franklin, does it?
Yeah. Duel of the Johns.
Duel of the Johns.
And now Duel of the Fates plays in the
Yes.
background. I can make that happen, actually.
Please do that.
I should make that
that
happen. It's
because
Duel of the
I really
Johns.
want to see John Schofield and John Bell Hood.
Which one's Darth Maul?
I mean, I guess I'm going to have to go with Hood because he gets cut in half.
Oh, that's good.
That is.
That's really
I'm
good.
just saying.
That
It's just hard for me to imagine John Schofield as Qui-Gon Jinn, though. And as
It is.
Obi-Wan.
It is.
Oh, no. So Schofield, we can say, is maybe...
Please don't say Jar Jar Binks.
No, I wasn't going to say that. I was going to say, we can make Schofield Qui-Gon, and then we can make General Cox Obi-Wan.
I actually really like that.
I do too.
Yeah. Jacob Cox can come in and train up somebody.
Are we doing the Civil War as Star Wars right
Does
now?
that mean Jefferson Davis is Palpatine? I am the Senate.
Do it.
Well, considering his kind of stranglehold on all the states, yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I mean...
Does that make then Lincoln Mace Windu or Yoda? Is he the strongest Jedi or is he the wisest?
Oh, man. I feel like... Can we just make Lincoln Qui-Gon again? I don't know. I just...
Qui-Gon twice. We've
Yeah,
got two Qui-Gons.
That's a lot of Liam Neeson. That's just what I'm saying.
I think he's got to be Mace Windu. No,
he-
Grant's Mace Windu.
See, no.
McClellan is Mace Windu. Mace Windu's full of himself. Mace Windu is pride.
But McClellan isn't that strong, and Mace Windu is the strongest Jedi.
We're getting way off topic here.
No, we're really not. We said that we would do an episode of the Civil War that was all about Star Wars. We
And,
call it the Galactic Civil War.
You can make the argument the Confederacy wasn't completely wrong. They wanted more representation. They felt like the...
You mean in the Star Wars
Yes, in the
Confederacy?
Star Wars
I want...
Confederacy.
Okay, yeah. Just
I was
making
going to see
sure.
how long it took for you guys to realize which direction I was
All
going.
right, I was like...
I was hanging in there. There again, though, Star Wars makes its way into the Civil War now.
Yeah.
So, John Bell Hood and John Schofield. Two guys we talk about a lot at all three sites. Cardhouse, Carton, Rupa Villa.
Mm-hmm.
What do we want to talk about old John Schofield? Let's start with him.
Yeah, he's born in New York, but eventually works his way into Illinois, where he'll end up in West Point, class of 53, same class as Hood.
Roommates.
And McPherson.
They were
A couple
roommates.
others, too.
Yeah.
Class of 53's got a lot of Civil War studs in it.
Yeah, they all know each other. I know after West Point, I know Hood ends up in Texas. Where does Schofield end up? What does he do?
I think he qualifies as an engineer.
Engineer? Okay.
I think so.
Yeah, because I know, in the Battle of Franklin, he's working on repairing the bridge, and I always make the comment, he's a West Point graduate. He's an engineer. He knows how to work this.
Yeah, they've been around the block a time or two.
Yeah.
Yeah, Schofield, he also, though, gets his reputation, especially post-war.
Like when he gives himself the Medal of Honor?
Well, because he was in
Ambitious.
charge of the entirety of the United States Army.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Grant, Sherman, Sheridan, Schofield after that. So it's kind of like one of those things. Like, he clearly was riding the political train and trying to find a way to...
Yeah, he's very much a political general.
Yeah,
like
move himself forward.
Yes.
Which, I mean, I always have to think about...
Okay, he wasn't an engineer.
He wasn't?
No.
No, he qualified as an artilleryman.
Oh.
Which is like, you can, if you're in the top of the class, you can pick.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you just decide whichever you want to do. So his first course was at... His first post I combined all of the words together.
Yeah.
Was at Fort Moultrie in South Carolina. That's not far from Fort Sumter. So here's a little quote for you. John Schofield served 2 years in the artillery. His first post was at Fort Moultrie, which he later noted involved the same guns that were used to bombard Fort Sumter in 1861. He got sick while he was there during the Seminole Wars, and who saves John Schofield's life, but yet another Confederate general, A.P. Hill.
Oh, that's funny.
So A.P. Hill gets him out of South Carolina, out of Florida, whatever. He gets better and then goes and becomes a professor at West Point.
Okay.
So he's there in mathematics and experimental and natural philosophy right up to 1861.
And again, that I this is kind of something I do think is interesting, is that Hood and Schofield really are almost kind of perfect foils for one another. Because I really do think that you could not find two people who are just different on kind of every level like that.
Yeah.
Schofield's way more of the book smart, classroom heavy kind of individual, where Hood's strengths lied in the practical
For
fighting.
God's sakes, Schofield was in books and Hood was in a boxing ring while they're at West Point.
Exactly.
Hood's an athlete. Schofield. If you want to really simplify it, Hood's a jock and John Schofield is the president of the math club.
I just imagine Homer Simpson seeing Schofield walk by and just going, nerd!
And now, no matter how I talk about him, that's going to come to mind. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
You are welcome.
Man. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, you're right.
Thank
but
you.
Still.
Thank you. I have my moments. That's what I bring to the table.
I hate that you're not wrong.
You are welcome.
So John Schofield then commissions, he leaves the army, actually, for about like a year, from 60 to 61. Then in 1861, he rejoins. He's out in Missouri, in St. Louis, because he goes and takes a job there as a professor at a university. And then by the time the war breaks out, he joins the army, rejoins the army, I should say. And he's there with our dear friend, not John C. Fremont, but Nathaniel Lyon.
I was gonna say,
General Nathaniel Lyon.
we were just talking about him the other day.
I get my Missouri and Western. I mean, the war out there is like
It's chaos.
It is. It is. There's a
whole
lot
rat's
going
nest of
on.
people.
I mean, just Missouri in general is one of those states that's basically a 50-50 split, but it's like there's just pockets of
Yeah,
both
it's not
sides.
like it's geographic. Like, oh, northern Missouri. It's just everywhere.
Yeah.
But that's where that's where John Schofield is in the very outset of the war. Fights at Pea Ridge. We see what happens with him there. Lyon is killed. Schofield sort of kind of pseudo assumes command of the army, even though as the chief of staff, he's not actually next in line to command an army. He just sort of does it. And he does well enough to where he doesn't need to be replaced.
See, and that I think is something that does come up on tour, and I know you were talking about this the other day, but usually when people do bring up Schofield, and he is the one that I think gets mentioned the least between him and Hood, when they do bring him up, it's always to knock him, to always say that he wasn't really a good fighter, but as far as we can tell, that's just not true.
Yeah, I mean he's not amazing.
No, I wouldn't. I mean, that's not what I'm saying, but
He doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
he is
just good
by,
enough.
He's surrounded by pretty capable people, and he just has to be good enough.
he's completely competent though.
Yes.
And I would even argue that the best quality a general can have is delegating to the people who know what they're doing.
Yep.
It's kind of like how a movie director works. You don't necessarily need to be the expert. You just need to know who the experts are and get them to do what they need to do.
And then those generals that have to have their hands in everything and have to know everything, you usually see them fail on the battlefield. And that's the big criticism of Schofield, is that he wasn't on the line.
Yeah.
He wasn't there. He wasn't with Jacob Cox. He was building a bridge. And what was that really doing? Getting the army out of Franklin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Completing the objective of getting to Nashville.
And not only that, but he is also in communication with his superior, George Thomas, in Nashville. So he's not doing nothing.
He said it.
I know.
You didn't woo.
I didn't woo.
Go
kind of
ahead. We
upset
know you
me.
want to. Okay.
There it is. There it is.
Had to get one in.
Had to get one.
So he's constant correspondence with his superior officer, and then he's in constant correspondence with his subordinates too. It's not like he just looks at Jacob Cox and says, "All right, I'm going to go build a bridge.
Have fun, buddy."
Take care." all throughout the day. They're constantly talking to one another, constantly sending messages back and forth. And then throughout the night, as the fight's wearing on, Schofield's relying on Jacob Cox to constantly keep him up to date with the most up-to-the-minute reports from the line. And then he's still in command of the Army, and the fact that he's sending orders back to Jacob Cox. It's Schofield that tells Cox, all right, now pull the artillery.
Yeah.
Okay, now pull the infantry. Okay, now pull the last little bits out of town. And then we'll be out of it.
And I do think it's also something to be said that there's a certain quality that good leaders have, which is being able to trust your subordinates and not feeling the need to constantly micromanage. Now, again, the other side of that is Cox has to be good at his job, but
it's strange, and I guess because I've been down the Gettysburg rabbit hole for the last couple of months, the big criticisms that we see of Schofield are the same reasons that people praise Lee.
it's a very good, interesting point.
Because all Lee does is delegate. He's not on the line. He's not on the second day when Longstreet's leading his assault against the center of the Federal Army. Where's Lee? He's at his headquarters.
Yeah, Lee did lose Gettysburg.
But they still say the same
That's a
thing.
fair point. I see what you're saying.
It's not about winning or losing. The argument's about, well, Lee was such a great general because he was able to give his orders to his subordinates. Or his subordinates were just really good.
Yeah.
And his subordinates were really good.
But again, this is
Until they weren't.
not to hit Lee. It's just one of those things.
It's one of the things where the argument is, it's not a whataboutism. It's how can you praise one and chastise the other. And in the same criticism that comes down for Hood is that he wasn't leading the way at Franklin. He wasn't out front of all the divisions. How about this? It's not an Army commander's job to be in front of their armies.
Let me ask you this, though. If John Bell Hood had both of his legs by the time of this battle, do you think he would have been leading from the
No,
front?
because he's an Army commander.
And that, I think, is, again, the distinction to make here.
Yeah.
I'm glad. I just wanted you to say
even
that.
the Corps commanders were held in reserve. It's not like they went in. Ben Cheatham didn't ride in.
Yeah.
They probably went about halfway, probably made it to like Privet's Knob or something, but didn't go all the way into the assault.
Yes.
But
again, I think that's bringing this back to Hood for a second, too. I just feel like that is another criticism that people do give him, is that, well, if he had been fully himself, then
So what David's talking about, for those of you that maybe are listening to this episode, maybe it's the first time you've listened to Tour Guide Talk, and maybe the first time that you've learned about John Bell Hood, is that by the time of the Battle of Franklin, he's been wounded twice. A piece of shrapnel at the second day of Gettysburg has ripped his left arm, all the muscle tissue from like his bicep down to his wrist. It's rendered that arm partially immobilized. And then he was shot in the right leg at the Battle of Chickamauga, and the leg is amputated 4 inches beneath the hip. So he is in the saddle through a lot of labor and a lot of customization. He's got a cork prosthesis. So he is not the same physical build that he was, say, when he graduated from West Point in 1850.
and I mean,
But he's tough as nails.
He is.
Like, he's still going.
And that's the thing, too, about like a big giant difference between both Hood and Schofield is Schofield's promotions did not come from battlefield victories. They came from essentially competence. He's promoted, but not by battlefield merit, but just by being competent.
being less incompetent than the other guys.
Right. and Hood's promotions come from his battlefield actions. Peninsula Campaign, he leads the charge up Malvern Hill. He's there at Eltham's Landing where his men push back. And just to show you how close to being in the fight he was, when Hood was the commander of the Texas Brigade, this also shows you how close he came to not being alive by 1864. No one in his brigade had loaded their rifles, save for one soldier who had been on a hunting expedition the day before. And Hood rides out right in front of the Texas Brigade, steering them forward down these hills, down towards the, I can't remember what the necks are, the waterways that are there. Maybe it's the James River? I don't know. Don't quote me on that. But pushing them from Eltham's Landing down towards the Riverway against the Army of the Potomac. And a federal soldier is aimed, loaded, and ready to fire when that one loaded rifle from the entire Texas Brigade kills that man, and it's credited to have saved John Bell Hood's life. I mean, Hood is right there in the thick of the fight, so much so that his staff is kind of almost accidentally riding into federal lines and turning back around. And then he's there at Antietam. He's in Miller's cornfield. He's in the woods, and it's Lee that goes to Hood on September the 18th and tells him, or asks him rather, where his division is. And Hood points to Miller's cornfield and he says, "They're lying dead in the field where you sent them."
Yeah.
And this is the same Hood he misses Chancellorsville, but he's there at Gettysburg, and he's supposed to be the hammer that's going to slam against the federal line, and he's wounded. And then the entire attack kind of sputters out because you've lost a key division commander. That shows you his impact on the battlefield. But then he's recovered. He's there at Chickamauga, and he's part of the hammer yet again that's going to crash right through the center of the federal line there. And I don't know how much crashing through you actually do when there's about a half-mile open wide hole in the middle of the line. That Longstreet just kind of says, "Okay, we'll go through there." But Hood's leading the way. He's there at Dyer's Field. He's caught up in all the gunfire. He's there with Jerome B. Robertson and the Texas Brigade. And that's when a bullet strikes him in the upper right thigh. And the description, I think it's one of the men of Robertson's staff, says that the round hit him with so much force it actually threw him from the saddle.
Wow.
So he ends up on the ground. He's demanding. He's saying, "I will not be taken off the field. I will not come off the field until this action is resolved." Finally, the Texans push through, and Dyer's Field, who's there, but Emerson Opdyke. Anyhow, he gets thrown back. Always a good way to roll him in, looking at his picture. Right there.
You want to give a Bill woo right now?
Woo.
Okay.
That was a sad woo. Anyhow.
I've never heard you woo Emerson Opdyke before.
Yeah, it's sarcasm mostly. It's amazing what happens there.
Was it a friendly fire shot?
No, it was
Okay.
I mean, he's right there in the thick of the fight. He's trying to rally his Texas Brigade. I mean, that's the men that he's been fighting with since 1861, and they're kind of stymied there. He rides up. He's grabbing the colors. I think it's the 1st or the 4th Texas when he's shot, thrown from the saddle, removed from the field, and his amputation is risky because it's so high. I forget the actual statistics, but it's only like 4 men survive this operation, and he's one of them.
When you get that high up in the light, there's just so many veins and arteries that anything could go wrong.
Yeah, and yet he survives, pulls through, recovers in Richmond, gains kind of the admiration of the Confederate president, Jefferson Davis, and he's placed in command of a corps during the Atlanta campaign. And there are so many skeptics of Hood, so many, I call them Hood haters. I mean, they are.
I mean, a lot of them are.
We've talked about this because Eric and I did an episode yesterday on myths of Franklin. And one of the things that he said is, it's bad business to fall in love with dead people, but it's even worse to hate people that have been dead for 150 years and you never knew.
That's a very good point.
And how people, you never see it with the people that don't like John Schofield. They don't hate him and wish that he never lived. There are people that wish that John Bell Hood was never born.
Well, I think because he's almost the scapegoat for why does the South lose.
Oh, he absolutely is.
And, I mean...
Well, him and Longstreet, because they almost go hand in hand, because people blame Longstreet for not having the victories at Gettysburg, and they blame Hood for destroying the Army of Tennessee. But you have to be fair in that assessment. Joseph Johnston had done an incredible job of wrecking the Army throughout the Atlanta campaign. So when Hood assumes command, he's taking command, albeit a physically fit Army, but one whose morale is just totally sapped.
And just not necessarily in a position to do much about
it. He's got his back to the city of Atlanta. What's he supposed to do?
Yeah. Well, the other thing, and I guess this is kind of what I was alluding to before, is that whereas, of course, again, a general in that position of Hood or Schofield should not be leading the charge.
Right.
I think there is a part of Hood, though, that really wishes he could. Because I feel like that's just the kind of guy he is.
He's an offensive player.
That's what I mean. It's like I think the idea of him like sitting back, watching this battle unfold at Franklin, and not really being able to go out there and change how it's going personally bothers him. That's the impression I've always gotten. And I don't know. because I always think back on like Band of Brothers, just because I love that miniseries.
Mm-hmm.
I'm picturing like, Dick Winters trying to charge in. When it's like your rank can't allow you to do that anymore.
Right.
And
That's actually a really good comparison.
And again, it's just that.
But I also think it's one that he's used to by this point, too. Because he had been the Army commander since Atlanta. He had been engaged all around Atlanta. It's not like he was ever right out front with his men there.
Certainly. He's a
and
professional.
Then even as a Corps commander, he wasn't leading charges anymore. But brigade and division, he might have thrown himself out there. He's right there in the thick of it. That's how he ends up being shot twice.
Yeah.
And then that's the other difference between Hood and Schofield.
And we'll be right back after this commercial break.
Membership with the Battle of Franklin Trust is a partnership to help fulfill the Trust's mission to preserve, understand, and interpret the American Civil War. Annual memberships help with the day-to-day operations, including ongoing research, quarterly magazine productions, interpretive staff, museum collection oversight, and visitor programming. In addition, the Battle of Franklin Trust directs a portion of annual memberships to the Battle of Franklin Endowment to plan and prepare for the future needs. Become a member today at boff.org/membership.
Hood's always that kind of lead from the front guy. Mm-hmm. Schofield is a little bit more reserved.
Mm-hmm.
I have good subordinates. I've got good brigade commanders when he's in command of a division. I've got good division commanders when he's in command of a corps. They know what they're doing. Yeah. I just have to rely on them.
Absolutely.
And Hood has good subordinates, but they're good subordinates that aren't used to working with one another.
And they're good subordinates who personally try to undercut Hood.
And each other, which is my favorite part.
Yeah.
You've got Benjamin Cheatham, A.P. Stewart. A.P. Stewart is probably, of all of his subordinates, at least the most capable, certainly the most able of all of them, and probably the one with the least to gain in terms of personality and sort of reputation. Cheatham, Stewart, Stephen D. Lee.
Stephen Lee.
A man who has done everything. Infantry, cavalry, artillery. Now he commands a corps.
Yep.
Perfectly competent. And then you've got Forrest.
Who, even if you want to give Forrest credit, he is a very capable
officer. Very capable leader of men, but not a very capable cavalryman.
Yeah.
And you also need to remember, he was not attached to the Army of Tennessee. Joe Wheeler is the Army of Tennessee's cavalryman.
Yes.
He is a traditional cavalryman, gathering reconnaissance, making reports. Forrest is a raider, a glorified raider. Wheeler's not here. He's in Georgia, screening against Sherman. So Hood's got this team. I would almost call it a team of rivals, to steal from Doris Kearns Goodwin. And then you've got John Schofield, who has Jacob Cox and David Stanley. Two decorated, veteran, experienced officers who you can rely on.
Yes.
And who can work actually pretty well with one another. The animosity doesn't come till later.
Yeah. Well, and then I throw Wilson in there as well.
And James Wilson.
Who is underrated, I think.
Underrated largely because of where he comes from. He comes from the East, and who had been going up against in the East, the traditional cavalryman. In fact, I would say the best cavalryman in the Confederate Army is Jeb Stuart.
Absolutely.
And Wilson's being beaten up left and right by Stuart. Then he comes out west, and he has no idea where some of his men are. He's got to pull his cavalry corps together, and he's doing it all on the fly. That shows you that he can be relied on in a way that maybe Forrest, you've got to urge him. You've got to push him in the right direction constantly. And that's the strength that John Schofield has that Hood might lack.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Just to go off down the rabbit hole on this one, just because I figured we got you talking at this point. Would you say Wilson would prefer to go up against Forrest than he did Stuart?
I think so.
Because again, I feel like Forrest is one of those guys who's just been so mythologized that people, I think, coming into this battle, when they come to take a tour, they want to know where Forrest is, but then they're kind of disappointed when they leave, if that's like why they come in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where was Forrest in all this? Kind of off to the east.
Not really doing
anything.
much.
What was he doing in the campaign?
Ran into Wilson.
Running into Wilson a lot.
Bouncing around the state a bunch.
Well, the one thing that he does throughout the kind of the lead up to the campaign is he's doing a very good job of screening for Hood's advance, making sure there's nobody in front of him, making sure there's nobody on his flanks. He's doing a good job there. But where Forrest sort of lacks is in reconnaissance gathering, which is really the chief job of cavalry. In the Civil War,
Eyes and ears.
eyes and ears of the army, and then after a battle or before a battle, screen for an attack in the lead up to a fight, and at the end, essentially being like a mop-up crew. Come in, drive any stragglers, drive any skirmishers from the field, and then that's it. That's really what cavalry do. It's not like the Napoleonic times where they were the vanguard, and then the infantry came in behind them. You would have the infantry attack, and then the cavalry would charge in and defend. It doesn't look like that anymore. And what he does really, really, really well, we have to give credit, is in the screening and in the skirmishing. Because he fights like mounted infantry, moves from place to place, does a really good job of that. But as far as keeping Hood up to date as to where Schofield is, as to where Wilson's cavalry is, he's perfectly average in that capacity until you get to Spring Hill, and then everything falls apart.
And that was going to say, I feel like the impression I'm getting from this is that the biggest difference between Hood and Schofield and the respective armies is that Hood was not trusted by his subordinates, and his subordinates,
I think
there's just no trust there.
I don't disagree.
I feel like Schofield. Well, here's what I'm saying though. It's like I feel like when we look at something like Spring Hill, Schofield's giving orders, his men are giving information back, and that's kind of part of the reason why they're able to pull off this crazy escape up the road. Whereas Hood, you've got all these different people either second guessing, or again maybe not really sure what they're supposed to do, and not willing to trust that someone else is helping them.
Well, actually, I would argue that there's probably too much trust. And then to the other point, I think a lot of it is maybe misunderstanding.
Yeah, I think it's more.
Yeah.
Especially
I'll default to you guys then.
Especially here
in Spring Hill, I think it's more of a misunderstanding because for some reason, Cheatham is more obsessed with the city of Spring Hill instead of blocking the road.
Yeah.
And I think it's just fog of war.
Okay.
And I think he just realizes Clayburn is under extreme pressure, so he is trying to get
He's trying to support Clayburn.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then so he becomes
Again, you guys are definitely more the experts than I am on this one, so I will.
I don't mean to jump down on you.
No, please.
This is just I think it really is more of just a colossal misunderstanding.
Yeah. And then by the time realization comes into view the next morning and the fog of war is cleared, it's too late. Schofield's gone, and now you have no choice, but you have to follow up.
Yeah.
You've got to chase him down. And that's where Hood's decision making could be criticized by a lot of people, but I've said this a million times. I think I say it on every battlefield tour. I don't know if Hood made the right decision, but I certainly can't tell you he made the wrong one. I don't know if I would have made a different decision.
I tell people it's his only decision.
Yeah.
Like
What else could he do?
He's stuck between a rock and a hard place. This is it. There's no other option.
John Bell Hood did not go through all the tall grass, march through all these hills, lead his men all that way, just to turn around. He hadn't lost yet.
Yep.
True.
There's still one opportunity. Maybe, just maybe he could pull it off. It's a long shot, and he understood that. And all of his corps commanders, I think every single soldier on the line understood that. So that's Hood and Schofield. What about after the war? John Bell Hood naturally is defeated.
Yeah.
I think he surrenders in May of '65, Natchez, Mississippi. He's paroled, goes back to Texas, becomes a land manager.
He's also the first major Confederate general to ask for a pardon, correct?
I think so.
One of them?
Yeah. He's at least one of the first. And he encourages all of his men to do the same. And he's very much like, we lost. We must move on and be good American citizens now.
Which again, I think maybe it is part of the reason why I think he does get scapegoated then.
Well, that comes a lot too with
him.
He's in Texas, by 1868, he moves to New Orleans,
Yep.
gets involved in the cotton exchange there, gets married, Anna Hennon Hood, and they will have 11 children, 3 sets of twins. And while he's there, James Longstreet is also in New Orleans. And Longstreet has become a fierce advocate for Reconstruction. He's become a Republican in the post-war years. And I forget what year it is. I want to say it's 73 or 74. I think 74. Longstreet is quoted in the newspapers as saying, people of the South, we are a conquered people, and instantly castigated, hated by the Jubal Earlys of the world and by the kind of unapologetic, unreconstructed Confederates. And then in 74, Longstreet leads the Integrated Metropolitan Police Force in the Battle of Liberty Place against the White League. And then after that, very quickly leaves New Orleans, and he leaves the presidency of the American Life Association to his old division commander, John Bell Hood.
Yeah.
And so Hood starts traveling, goes all across the South, goes everywhere that you can think of. He's in St. Louis, he's in South Carolina, and actually while he's in South Carolina, he gives his own speech about Reconstruction and says that we should not allow ourselves to identify with the Ku Klux. We must reject them. He's talking about educating.
Because that'll make you popular in South Carolina.
Right. He's also talking about educating former slaves, trying to get sort of a kind of a real sense of education and of benefit. Is it's now time for us to pick these people up. So Hood has gone through his own sort of Longstreet moment, and he's hated for it too. And then John Schofield stays in the Army the rest of his life.
Yeah,
really,
pretty much.
yeah.
And that's the other key difference, though. Is I think whereas Schofield got this long political career, basically, Hood's, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure he dies by 48.
He's what?
He's not 50. I don't think.
He's 33 at Franklin. He dies in 1879. So that is.
I hope this doesn't make it into the podcast. This is just.
He's
bad
48
listening.
when he dies.
So I was correct.
Boom!
Yeah. Yeah, he's 48 when he dies. And he doesn't live long enough, really, to even finish his own memoirs. He doesn't live long enough to finish his own published full version of the
Can we
memoir.
talk about his memoirs real quick? Because I love the story behind it.
Oh, the orphan? Yeah.
Because P.T. Beauregard also hated Johnson. So he was like, oh, Hood didn't like him. Hood died.
Yeah.
I'm going to pay for this to be published because I also don't like who Hood did not like.
Yeah, and then the other part of it, too, is that by the time
I
Hood
love
gets
that
into the
pettiness.
1870s, he's already engaged in kind of memory wars with Joe Johnston. Because Johnston's writing about Atlanta, and Hood's writing about Atlanta, and they're reading, you read one and you read the other, and you're reading two very, very different stories. And then when Hood, by 78, he goes to Washington, D.C., he meets with William Tecumseh Sherman, who at the time I think is the General-in-Chief of the Army, and he's collecting reports.
Sounds correct.
And the two of them had Christmas together at one point. In New Orleans.
Imagine that very awkward
Yeah.
Christmas dinner.
Well, I mean, because
So anyways, there I was beating your butt all around Atlanta.
it wasn't because Sherman
Remember
also
you burned Atlanta and I got blamed for it?
but Sherman too though had that Louisiana connection.
Yeah, but it's also a connection between two former adversaries. And he had the same connection, and I think a bit more of an intense connection with Joe Johnston. One would be pallbearer at the other one's funeral. And then I think Johnston gets sick almost immediately after that and passes away just a few months later, or years later. But Hood never gets to finish his memoirs. They're published in kind of an incomplete, unedited, and sort of shuffled up way. They don't really flow chronologically, and yet it's the last thing that you really have from him. It's the last statement he can give. And then Ben Cheatham and the other kind of the Middle Tennessee culprits, they get to write their own recording of history. They get to counter everything that Hood says. He's not there to defend himself.
Yeah.
And so he's gone. He fades into history. Stein stays submerged. John Schofield, meanwhile, doesn't retire until 1895.
Wow.
So he spends 47 years or 46 years in the Army. And he's a career soldier. He retires at lieutenant general, and he's a Medal of Honor recipient as of September of 1892 when he awarded himself the Medal of Honor for his actions at Pea Ridge.
By the way, wasn't his biography like? I think I had someone say at one point that his own like autobiography was like almost required reading for a time as well.
I think at West Point, yeah.
Yeah.
He
So
also goes on to get Hawaii as a colony.
Yeah, and that's the gateway to the Pacific, is what he calls it.
Schofield Barracks,
named
yeah.
for him. So these two men live very, very different lives. They fight very, very different wars, and they have a very, very different post-war life and career.
Mm-hmm.
And so to think of them as being so similar just because they're born the same year, they're both 33, they both have beards, I think that's really where the similarities end.
Yeah.
And these are two very complex, very complicated men that I think when we talk about them and when
They were both Democrats.
I mean, hey.
I mean, that's correct. Yeah.
Different sides of the same coin.
Yeah. But their time in the Army, their time in the fight, their time alive, I think their life.
Yeah.
It's worth studying, and it's also worth us as good guides, as good interpreters, to be objective and to be fair to them. Neither one of them is a hero. Neither one of them is a villain. I think they're both very flawed, very complex, very complicated men that we should spend time with, and we should spend time getting to know them through their memoirs and through their autobiographies, and we should encourage, I think, listeners and guests alike.
And there are two great books. We do carry Advance and Retreat, which is John Bell Hood's autobiography and kind of his time with Joe Johnston. And then we also carry Sam Hood's Rise, Fall, and Resurrection of John Bell Hood, which is a great book looking at both, like the title says, the rise, fall, and resurrection of...
Kind of dealing with his legacy.
Yeah, his legacy.
Because after he's dead, he's castigated by the Southern Historical Papers and the pages of the Confederate Veteran. And then by the 1960s and 70s, the reemergence of the Civil War in popular memory. And then by the 90s, he's a drug-addicted amputee who's angry, having a love affair with a woman in Richmond and hating all of his men and ordering them to die by mass suicide. And so Hood's picture kind of infamously hung in the bathroom at the visitor center at the Carter House, like a little sick joke.
Yeah, that was weird.
And then just in the last maybe 15, 20 years, so much more work has gone into figuring out more about him and understanding who he was. And then John Scofield's got a book in the bookstore too, 47 Years in the Army, his own personal memoir. And then there is a good biography of him. It's by Donald Conley. Harder to find, but very, very good and worth your time. So I got nothing else.
No, I feel like we've kind of tackled everything we needed to.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. Thanks for you guys coming in on your day off. I have to work now. if
That's
all right.
fine.
Well, I'll be playing God of War, so just know.
I
And
will
happy
be
birthday,
doing
Bill.
Thank you.
all things. It's your birthday?
Tomorrow, the 21st.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you.
April 21st, a day that will live in infamy. All right. Thanks for listening.